What is a callback function? I've seen numerous people try to explain this in numerous different programming languages, and it seems like every single time they just overcomplicate this process. So I'm going to try to explain it, and hopefully I don't do the same thing for you. In essence, it's just a function that's passed into another function as an argument and is then called inside that other function. This makes a lot of sense in asynchronous languages since we don't want two functions to compete for finishing times if we need certain code to be executed first. So what we can do is pass the function as an argument into another function, have that code executed first that's needed to be executed first, and then call that function as a callback function and have the callback function executed last. We're used to passing strings, integers, even arrays as arguments into a function, but we might not be familiar with passing functions as arguments into other functions. So let's start off pretty easy and then work our way up as far as complexity goes. Before we get into callback functions, let's just recap functions in general. So we'll create a function called add1 to x, and it will accept one argument, which is x, and all it is just going to echo out x plus 1. We can then call the function by saying add1 to x, pass whatever number we want, like 5, go to the browser, and if we open up the page, there it is. It says 6, which is exactly what it is. Now that we had a quick little recap, let's go ahead and create another function, and we'll name this function cat says. All it's going to do is say echo dogs suck. And that's it. So now we can call that function exactly the same way, but you get the picture. We'll create one more function, and that function, we'll call it animal says. So normally we could pass an argument. We'll call this animal type, and we could say echo animal type dot says something, right? So then later we could say animal says, and then we could say, for example, cat is the animal type, and we can even have it say something. So let's just say that we pass another argument called saying, and we echo out saying. So what do we want it to say? Well, we want it to say dogs suck. All right, let's open up the browser, hit refresh, and there it is. Cat says dogs suck. But this isn't a tutorial on functions. I mean, we already know how to do this stuff right here. This is a tutorial on callback functions. So what do we want to do? What we want to do is somehow pass this whole function into here, right? And then have it execute where this saying is. How do we do that? Well, it's pretty actually easy. So I'll show you guys both ways because you may encounter both approaches in PHP, but the overall concept is exactly the same. So we'll say, we'll pass the function name, and then we'll call this parameter animal function. Now let's just go ahead and delete this. Not cat sucks. That's what I think of cats. But cat says, that is our function name. So that is the function that we want to pass to this function right here. And it's just a string currently that says cat says. It's coming here, and it's going to come here, and then we can do something with it, right? So currently we could just say echo animal function, and it will just display this string. As a matter of fact, let's go over here, hit refresh, and as you can see, cat says, cat says. How do we convert this string into a function call? Well, there's a couple of different ways, right? So PHP has a helper function called call user function, or we could do it with variable functions, which we'll cover that pretty soon. But let's go ahead and use that helper function called the call user function, right? So this is just a built-in function by PHP, and all you do is you pass a string to it, and it pretty much does exactly what the variable function does, right? So it will convert this into a function by appending parentheses to it, and then executing it, right? So what we can do is we can pass our animal function string to it, and what it will do is it will evaluate it and then execute it, right? So we'll call this call user function. It's cat says comes here, which is a string. The string gets passed into this call user function. Once it's evaluated, you know that this cat says with parentheses produces a function, and it should just say dogs suck. Let's go ahead to the browser, hit refresh, and there it is. That is a callback function, right? We passed a function, right, to as an argument to a function, and then we're executing it after whatever else we needed to have it executed. So we're executing it inside another function. Pretty simple so far, right? We can even pass arguments. Using this type of style, we can even pass arguments to the callback function. So let's create another function. Function animal says to. And what we'll do is we'll set 3 different parameters. So animal type, animal function, and then whatever we want that animal to say. So for example, saying. We'll then echo out animal type dot says, just like before. And now we're going to be calling another function. So before we actually complete this call user function, let's go ahead and create another function called dog says. And dog says is going to accept one argument, and we can say dog saying, for example, and then we can say echo dog saying. So literally pointless kind of type function, but if we were to call this function, we would say dog says, pass whatever we want in here, like cat suck, and it would just say echo cat suck. So now let's go back to this function. What we're going to have is a function, animal says to. First argument is exactly like before. We're going to pass an animal type. Animal type is just, for example, like dog, and all it is a string. So it's going to say dog says, and then we're going to call, we want to call this function and pass it some saying. Well, what is the function name is the first thing. So animal function, and guess what? This built-in PHP call user function has an optional second parameter, which you can set it so that you can actually pass it as an argument to whatever function you're calling. So let's call this function and then walk through it one more time. Animal says to. This time we're going to say dog. The animal function name is going to be called dog says, because that is our function. And then what do we want to pass as an argument to this function up here? Well, what we want to pass is that the dog is going to say cats suck. All right, so let's walk through it. Animal says to passes the dog animal type string. It comes here. It comes here. Echo dog says. Simple so far. Then we're going to pass the dog says function name, which is that function name. And we're going to pass this saying, which is going to come here, it's going to come here, and it's going to come here. The animal function comes here, which is dog says, it comes here, and it gets replaced with that. These 2 parameters right here make up that right there. Let's see if it actually works. So we're going to go ahead, click refresh. There we go. Dog says cats suck. Since PHP supports variable functions like the ones we looked at the 38 tutorial, we don't have to use the call user func built-in function. We can use the variable function. So let's reword the previous example. This time we'll create another function called animal says 3. I know it's very original, but I want to stick to the theme so that you can see the progression. And it's going to accept the animal type, the animal function string right there, and the saying exactly the same as this. Then we're going to echo out the animal type dot says, and now instead of calling that call user function, all we're going to say is animal function, which is that right there, append some parentheses to it, And then we can actually pass some arguments exactly the same, right? So we can say saying. So what we can do is now animal says 3. Say that it's a dog again. Dog says, which is our dog says function. And that dog says function is expecting an argument. So we're going to say cat suck again. Let's open that up in the browser. And there it is. Dog says cats suck again. Per convention, we would change the parameter animal function to be named callback. So we're changing that to callback. So we're going to create another function. You guessed it. Animal says 4. It's going to accept, you guessed it, 3 arguments. So animal type, and then we're changing the animal function variable name to be called callback. And then finally, we're going to pass that third parameter, or third argument, which just happens to be saying. So just like before, we're going to say echo animal type dot says, and then we're going to be calling our callback, which is exactly the same thing we did up here, where we typed in animal function, but now we're calling it callback. And then this callback function is going to accept an argument, which is saying, and that's it. So let's go ahead and call it animal says 4, animal type dog, callback. Well, what is our callback function called? So what is our animal function, right? You can think of it that way. Since we're going to be passing an argument to it, dog says fits that category nicely. So let's double check that. Yep. Dog says. And then it needs one more argument, which is what does the dog actually say? Let me out. So there we go. That's what the dog will say. So let's walk through it one more time. First argument, we're passing dog. Dog goes here into the animal type. Animal type comes here. It's going to say echo. Dog says. Then the second argument is this dog says string. It gets passed as a string here. And then because PHP has variable functions and we append these parentheses, then this string gets converted into a function call, right? What is the function that's going to be executed? Well, it's dog says. So it's exactly like saying dog says right here, right? Where is dog says? Dog says is up here. Dog says accepts a variable, and that variable is a saying. And what is the saying we're passing to it? Let me out. So let me out comes here, goes into the callback, and then gets put right here, and then finally echo let me out. So let's go ahead and refresh our browser. Dog says let me out. Finally, we can pass the function itself as an argument. We don't have to create an external function if we don't want to. So for example, we didn't have to create this dog says function up here. How can we do this? Well, we can do this because we know that PHP supports anonymous functions. So if we wanted to utilize this animal says 4 and pass an actual anonymous function to it, what would that look like? Well, let's take a look. So we would just call it again, animal says 4. It starts off exactly the same, dog, and then I'm just going to go ahead and type it up again just so you guys can see it. We can say leave me alone. So now instead of actually passing the function name, we can pass the function itself. So let's go ahead and create a function inside here, and I just want to put it all on one line so you guys can see that properly. And that function is going to accept a saying, and then it's going to echo out that saying. So it's kind of crazy, right? But let's look at this logically, right? We have dog. It goes to animal says 4. So dog says. Then we're passing this whole function, right? The whole function is assigned right here. And now it gets evaluated right here. So this gets converted into basically this function, right? It's like you assign this whole function to a variable called callback, and then you execute it with these parentheses. if you don't remember that, I'd suggest you watch my 39 tutorial on anonymous functions. And we can open that up real quick. And we can see, for example, right there, in one of the anonymous functions, we assigned to stuffDogSays an anonymous function, and then how do we execute this? By appending it with these parentheses. So we're literally just doing this whole process all at once inside here, right? So we're passing this whole function as right there as a callback. It's assigned to that. And then, now that it's assigned to this, basically exactly the same thing as what we did right here, right? We're assigning it to that. So there it is. Now, in order to execute it, we just append some parentheses. So now in order to execute it, it exists right here, right? In order to execute it, we just append a couple of parentheses, and there it is. So now you can also accept a parameter, right? An argument. It's exactly the same thing like before. Where is this saying, right? If we look at the callback, this is the function. This callback is, just imagine there's an equal sign right here, equals function saying echo saying, right? So we're passing this saying to this callback function, utilizing, adding these open and close parentheses. This saying itself may be a little confusing for you guys, so we could name this whatever. Says, for example. Dog says. And then dog says, right? So here is the saying. It comes right here, and it gets executed once the saying itself gets passed into the callback function. Trying to reiterate this as many times as I can, as many different possible ways, just so you guys can understand it. I know this was a little bit tricky for me when I first started out, when I looked at what the heck does this even mean. So I'm trying to approach it as many different ways as possible. So I think an additional thing that I'm going to do once we execute this code and actually run it is try to visualize like what is happening right here, right? So let's just go over here, hit refresh, and you can see that it says dog says leave me alone. I guess I misspelled that. Yep, leave me alone. That's what I wanted to say. All right, so let's walk through this step by step. So step one, I'll do this right here. Step one, dog string is passed as an argument to animal says 4. This dog is passed as a string right there. And then it gets moved down here into this echo statement. It says echo dog says. Okay, so far so good. Now the complicated part, right? Second step, this whole function, so anonymous function, is assigned, and I'm going to say it kind of weird just so it makes sense, is assigned to callback parameter, right? So you can think about it like basically what this happened right here, right? We'll just say, push that right there. This callback is equal to, what is it equal to? Well, it's equal to this whole exact thing, right? So that is what's happening inside right there. So when we're passing this whole thing here, there it is, and it's being assigned to this callback, right? Well, if we remember our anonymous functions, how do we now call this callback? We go here, and we can see that's exactly what we did right there. How do we call it? By just appending some parentheses. So let's go over here. And you can see that that's exactly what we did. We appended some parentheses to it. Now, because this callback also accepts an argument itself, we can actually pass an argument to it. What argument are we going to pass to it? Well, we're going to pass it this saying argument, right? Leave me alone. So there's our saying argument right there, our saying parameter. And all we're doing is we're passing it into here, right, into this execution. So callback, that's how you would execute it. And then we would pass the saying, and the saying itself is actually leave me alone. So just so you guys can see it, one right under the other. So that gets passed into here, and then that gets passed right there. So now echo whatever the saying, leave me alone. And as you could have seen, that's exactly what we received when we refreshed the browser. So dog says, leave me alone. Let's refresh it one more time so it's not along, but it says alone. There we go. Now you'll see it many different times. What people do is they'll do something like this, and then move this like that, right? Just to different layers, right? Some people might actually even do something like that. All it is just formatting. I mean, honestly, it's exactly the same thing. So yeah, that's what it is. It's just formatting. So we have the animal says for, what we're calling it, and instead of having everything on one line, you're passing the first argument, you're passing the second argument, and you're passing the third argument. And that's all it is. A lot of the times they actually might even do something like that to move it just on the next line. So this is just for clarity's sake. It's exactly the same thing as what we just did before, where we, just visually this is what we're accustomed to most of the time, just seeing it all on one line. But we don't have to go to one line. PHP doesn't say anything about the amount of spaces that you can have before or after. So we can just move everything on its own individual line. And this actually might be pretty clear as well. There's our first argument, our second argument, third argument. And then if we wanted to just kind of separate this function out a little bit as well, move it like that. There we go. Believe it or not, we can make this even cleaner with an arrow function. We will have to modify the function itself though, since the arrow function can only return something and it can't actually echo something. So how would we do that? Well, I guess let's create another function first. We'll call this one animal says 5. I can't believe we're up to the 5th one. And it's gonna do the exact same thing. So animal type, callback, and saying, and then down here we're gonna echo animal type dot says, and then echo instead of, so let's look at the previous one. So before we just called it callback, now the callback function is actually going to return something. So if we were to go all the way up here to one of them, so instead of saying dog says and then having echo, if we just did a return right here, then we would have to echo out the function itself. So we're going to go ahead and basically just say that. So the callback function itself is going to return something, so we're going to have to echo out whatever that callback function says, right? And then we're going to pass our saying to it. The reason this is underlined is because I put this comment up here and it's thinking it's PHP doc comment, and it's saying, hey, you're missing the, let's see what it says exactly, the argument PHP doc missing. So if we wanted to make this PHP doc worthy, we would put in at animal param at animal type, and as you can see, it's removed. But I'm not going to do that right now. This is not a tutorial about PHP doc, so we're just going to comment that out that way, and now it's removed completely. So we have this animal says 5, and now we just have to call it, right? So animal says 5, and again we're going to build off on it, and we're going to do another dog, and we're going to pass again a function like before. Is this saying return saying. So pretty simple function, right? All it is just you're passing a saying and it returns a saying. So let's just say leave me alone too, right? Exactly the same thing like up here. Where is it? Like what we were kind of doing with this one, animal says 4. But instead of doing the echo statement, we're doing a return statement. So let's go ahead and move this to individual lines so you guys can see it properly. There we go. There we go. And animal says 5, accepts 3 arguments. The first one is dog, the second one is this function, and the third one is the saying, right? So just remember, you're not jumping from here to here automatically. Passing dog, dog gets passed here. Passing this function, function gets assigned to this parameter. Then in order to execute the function, or to call it, we attach parentheses, there it is, and then here we're accepting this saying, which if you can visualize it, this whole thing is attached to right there. So that's kind of how you're moving along, right? That's how you're moving that thing. If you don't remember, just kind of reference what we did up here. And let's just double check, right? Let's double check. Dog says, leave me alone too. Now how does the arrow syntax come into play? Well, since this is just returning something, right? We can convert that anonymous function quite easily into an arrow function by just doing something like that, right? So function saying, and then return saying. And that is our arrow function. So there we go. Pretty simple, looks pretty neat. It's not as massive as this whole function or as the function was before. And if we go and hit refresh, you can see that we get exactly the same thing. All right, now what we can do is move everything back up to one line because it actually is decent enough to fit on one line, right? So a lot of the times you'll see code like this where it says, the function, maybe one parameter, the arrow function, and then maybe another argument right there. That's pretty much it. I mean, I can't think of any other example that I can give you guys right now as far as callback functions go. I think this should help you out in any kind of programming language, not just PHP, to be honest, when it comes to callbacks. I hope this made sense. I've gone over it as many times as I knew how to, and I hope one of those explanations stuck with you.